Welcome to the premiere episode of the Hail to Michigan podcast. I'm your host, Ronnie Harder. With me today are two of my gracious co-hosts. We'll start with Contown. You may know him as Contown from the Michigan Insider Victor's Club message boards. He's one of the smartest people out there. When I reached out to him to talk about doing this podcast together and hosting it, he was very excited as much as I was. And I'm excited, Con, to do this podcast with you and Matt. So, Con, we'll start with you first to introduce yourself. How are you today?
Doing good, Ronnie. Excited about this project, as you mentioned, to fellow huge Michigan fans, football fans generally, and great parts of the Michigan Insider community over there.
Yeah, it's a ton of fun on that message board. I mean, it seems like almost every day there's a meltdown. Almost every day there's something. It's always an adventure. It's one of my favorite message boards that there are on the 24/7 sports message board world. No, it's great to have you on, man. Matt, you may know him as Michigan 5 on the message board. Matt, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Ronnie. I appreciate the invite on this. And, as much as I like writing about Michigan football, I like talking about it even more. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Just a quick background on how this podcast started. This was something I planned on doing solo, I would say a little over a year ago. And I don't know if you've ever tried to do a podcast solo, but it is literally one of the hardest things anybody could ever do. I think I took like 20 different takes and I deleted every single one. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to have to find a co-host. And like for a year, I asked different people and they just weren't interested, or they're just not huge Michigan football fans. I'm like, okay, you know what? Let me go on the message board and see if I can get some of these guys on board. That's when I reached out to Contown, and then we started messaging each other on Twitter. And then one thing led to another. He was like, hey, let's reach out to Matt and see if he's interested. We talk almost every day. And so we reached out, we both reached out to Matt on the message boards. And then here we are today on July 21st, recording our premiere episode. So now I'm super excited to get into this, and we'll dive right in to a really big topic that's been going around so far heading into fall camp for Michigan is their depth charts. And Contown, we'll start with you on the offensive depth chart. Just kind of go over who you have at each position. It'll be a 2 deep from each of us, and then we'll kind of break down, the positions that we're interested in the most. Go from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So we'll start with the most disliked, liked, on and off again man in Ann Arbor every year, the quarterback. I think it's got to be Cade. Got Cade McNamara as a starter, JJ as the backup. Cade got in last year, and in different situations, good and bad, always looked like he knew what he was doing, knew what he should be doing with the ball, and had a good control of the team. So I think the limited experience he's got coming in will help him hold off the really talented freshman. Running back, I've got Hassan Haskins starting, Blake Corum being the number 2. Again, got a really experienced guy, good leader on the field, leader in his play, and Hassan coming back. Really excited about Blake Corum. I could see Blake Corum by the end of the year kind of being a 50-50 1A, 1B situation with Haskins, but that's a really good starting 2 there. At the one outside spot, you can call it the Z wide receiver. I'll go with Cornelius Johnson starting. He kind of had quietly really good year last year, despite offensive struggles. He took a big step forward from the limited action we saw him in 2019 and made some big plays, gives you a really nice large receiver threat on the outside. I think his backup is probably going to be Andrell Anthony. We heard really good things about him from the spring, being an early enrollee, freshman from East Lansing, another big target. He was a basketball guy, was a skinny, long receiver, so we'll see what kind of weight he's been able to put on, but I think he'll probably crack the 2 deep just based on what we've heard from the spring. The other spot, I'm going to go with the transfer, Dalen Baldwin starting. He's got the size that the coaches clearly want on the outside. He sounds like he ran sub 4.5 at the tryout where he got his offer for Michigan coaches, and also ran sub 4.5 for the Ohio State coaches when they offered him. So was super productive. Jackson State last year for Coach Sanders, local guy. He's going to have to learn the offense and kind of build a rapport with quarterbacks, but I'm going to take a little bit of a leap and project him to start opposite of CJ on the outside. I think his backup will probably be Roman Wilson. You're kind of getting shallow in other guys that look like outside receivers, but I think Wilson's probably got enough height. He's super fast, got some playing time last year, both outside and in the slot. So I think I'll have him as Baldwin's backup, which puts, for me, Ronnie Bell as the starter in the slot. I think he's best suited as a slot receiver. The other outcome here, obviously, is Bell starting on the outside where he was last year, but I think he's been most productive in the slot. So if Dalen Baldwin can be the other outside starter, I think the staff would love to have Bell in the slot, and that allows Sainristil to kind of be, fourth receiver, not too much pressure on him to be a starter right now. And so I'll have Sainristil and AJ Henning can push Sainristil there too. He, to me, looked like one of our most explosive players on either side of the ball last year. So we'll see if he can push Sainristil, but you always hear great things about Mikey. So I'll go Bell starting slot and Sainristil as the backup there. Tight end, I think it'll be basically what we had last year. Eric All starting. Schoonmaker will probably be the number 2. You always hear great things about Eric All, his athleticism, his hands. Had some drops last year, but he's still a young guy, so I'm sure he'll put it together and get closer to a ceiling this year. Schoonmaker kind of remains one of the more slept-on guys on the team, if you will. He's really athletic in his own right, big, prototypical kind of tight end size. So I think that's going to be your 1-2 there. Offensive line, kind of a sure thing in left tackle and Ryan Hayes. I think Jim Harbaugh's said so much himself. Returning starter there, which is obviously great at left tackle. His backup, I'll say, is going to be Jeffrey Percy. He was kind of the project, if you will, into him being a linear left tackle, super great athlete, kind of a grow a tackle type, and 2 years into the weight room now, should be approaching a good playing weight, good strength. He obviously is going to know the system. So we'll go Percy number 2 at left tackle behind Ryan Hayes. Left guard, we saw Trevor Keegan kind of break into the starting lineup late last year, especially in that Penn State game. I think he's going to kind of keep that starting left guard spot over Chuck Filiaga, who I have as the backup there. Keegan is just a super talented kid, came in as a tackle, but really looks the part as a guard. He's a thicker guy and should be a mauler at that left guard spot. Center is one of the more interesting spots in the depth chart here. I really think the coaches want Zach Zinter to be the starting center. Coaches love him, and it sounded like he got some early run as center in the spring after being the right guard a good chunk of the year last year. So I've got Zach Zinter starting over Andrew Vastardis at center. Obviously, Vastardis is, I think, a 6th-year guy now. He's a grad student. He's been here forever. He's really a luxury to have as your backup center and could certainly be the starter there as well if Zinter stays out of guard, doesn't pick up the position as well, or what have you. But I think really the coach's ideal outcome here is Zinter at center and Vastardis as the backup. And then on the right side of the line, I've got Andrew Stuber starting at right guard, being backed up by Nolan Rumler. Stuber, obviously another guy who's got some versatility position-wise. He could be your right tackle as he has been previously, but I think ideal outcome the coaches want is probably Stuber at right guard. And then you hope Nolan Rumler is ready to be in the 2 deep. Obviously, he came in super highly rated prospect, a lot of talent. So hopefully he's the number 2 there. That's what I've got. And then at right tackle, I've got Keegan Barnhart starting at right tackle, backed up by Trenty Jones. Big position battle here. Neither are returning starters per se, but we've heard great things about Keegan Barnhart. He got some run last year with all the injuries and rotation on the offensive line. And then Trenty Jones, really highly rated recruit, and we started to hear some really good reports that he's getting close to what we thought he would be this spring. So I think he's going to fight for that right tackle positioning game, but I think it'll be Barnes starting and number 2 there.
Yeah, there's not much to argue with there. Matt, we can go over your offensive depth chart here, and then I'll go.
Yeah.
Kind of talk about what our differences are in these depth charts.
Yeah, Contown and I pretty much agree on everything there. A couple things I wanted to highlight. I think Edwards will be in the mix there at running back. I think he's right. It'll be like kind of a 50-50 split, but I have him as the number 3. I kind of extended that one to 3 a little bit. We got the same at quarterback. I feel the same way about the receivers. I really see the receivers kind of as a top 4 of Johnson, Baldwin, Ronnie Bell, and Mike Sanderson. I see them as the top 4, and then the 3 guys behind them would be Andrew Anthony, Roman Wilson, and AJ Henning. I see that kind of as a top 4 because, as you kind of mentioned, with depending on who is, if Baldwin's not ready on the outside, then Bell slides out there and Sanderson. I just see those guys as being the top 4, and who starts is kind of dependent on scheme and package they're going to run quite a bit. I've got the same at tight end, Eric All and Schoonmaker. I have heard a few whispers, and it was mentioned during his recruiting that Louis Hansen has a shot to crack the 2 deep.
Yep, I've heard those same whispers too.
Yeah, I think he's already got the size, and he's a lot of people thought he was pretty undervalued in terms of his recruiting ranking. So I could see him pushing, but as Contown mentioned, Schoonmaker is always kind of that underappreciated guy that everyone predicts will get passed on the depth chart maybe, and he just keeps being a productive player for them. I think they could use him a little bit more in the pass game this year.
He's got a Sean McCune feel to him.
Yeah. I think that kind of fits. He's kind of a quarterback, wide receiver in high school, and sometimes it takes a little bit more time for those guys than the guys that played tight end in high school. On the offensive line, I've got the same thing. I think that right tackle battle was a big thing to point out. I know Stuber was at tackle a lot during the spring, but I think this line is best when he's at guard. And I think a lot of that will be dependent on the center battle as well. So I've got Hayes and Percy at left tackle, Keegan and Filiaga at left guard, Zinner and Vastardis at center, and Stuber, Rumler at right guard. And I've got Barnhart over Jones at right tackle, but I could see that one going either way.
Yeah, I agree there. Just real quick to run down what my depth chart is. I got Cade obviously starting quarterback, JJ as the backup. At running back, I've got Haskins and Corum. I agree with both you guys. I think it could end up being a 50-50 split with Donovan Edwards just makes his way into that, 2 deep right away just because of the talent level that he has there. I have Ronnie Bell starting on the outside with Rowan Wilson being his backup. Then I've got Cornelius Johnson on the other side with Dalen Baldwin being his backup. I've got Angel Anthony pushing Dalen Baldwin and Roman Wilson both. Just the buzz coming out of spring ball with Anthony has been nothing but positive. So he's got a really bright future here at Michigan. At tight end, Eric All, Luke Schoonmaker. We've gone over the details on that. That's pretty easy to figure out there. At left tackle, I have a little bit something different at the backup spot. I have Ryan Hayes obviously starting, but I have Trenty Jones as the backup left tackle for now. I think how it's going to go is he's going to be the backup at both tackle spots, where if either guy goes down, either starter goes down, I have Carson Barnhart as the starting right tackle. He'll be the first guy off the bench, whether it's Hayes or Barnhart that goes down. And then Percy will be that backup left tackle, so to speak. So then at left guard, I've got Keegan, I've got Filiaga backing him up. I've got Zach Zinter at center with Vastardis backing him up. I've got Stuber at right guard, but I've got Greg Crippen as the backup right guard. The buzz coming out of spring with Crippen is that he made his way into the 2 deep right away, which really isn't any surprise. I thought he was underranked coming out of IMG. He never gave up a sack the entire time while he was there, which is impressive. I don't care who you are or where you play at, but especially at a school like IMG where it's full of teams where you're playing 4 or 5-star recruits every single game. That's pretty impressive to me. So it's no surprise that he's made his way into the 2 deep right away. That's who I have for the offense. So one thing that I wanted to do is to kind of highlight our position of choice. Matt, we'll start with you on the offensive line. What are some things that you're looking for in this offensive line heading into not only fall camp, but the 2021 season?
Yeah, I think last season, I think a lot of the young guys got a shot to play, kind of out of necessity with some of the injuries. I think Zach Zinner is the real X factor in all of this. I think there's a kind of maybe a fan or an insider preference of a starting O line, and then maybe what is a more likely offensive line. I could see it playing out to where some of the older guys, your Chuck Filiaga, your Vastardis, maybe those are the guys early, which I don't think would fall under the preference category for most fans.
Right.
And I think a lot of that hinges on Zach Zinter. I mean, if he can play, if he can be the starting center, I think that number one, it allows you to get your best five out there, because I think either Trente Jones or Carson Barnhart would be the fifth best lineman. I would have both of those guys ahead of Vastardis. So if Zinter can play center, that allows Stuber to slide down, play his best position at right guard, and that also allows either one of Barnhart or Trente Jones to come in at tackle. If Zinter can't play center, then you're looking more likely that Vastardis is there. Stuber is back out to right tackle, and Zinter is slotted in there at right guard. So I think, not only for this season, but for next season, and not that that's going to factor into the decision making, but I do think that factors into, the fans or insiders, preferred line is like, okay, not what's just best right now, but what's going to be the best long term. I mean, if Zinter can play center, you would bring back minimum 3 and potentially 4 into the next season, starting offensive lineman. And I just think that would just allow, most importantly, that would allow the best 5 on there. A lot of the young guys have gotten some seasoning. They're talented. A lot of them were highly rated prospects. So I think the O line is in better shape than probably it would look from the outside, just because they were very young last year and they were forced to play a lot of combinations.
Yeah, a couple things on that. First is, if Trente Jones or Carson Barnhart is your 5th best lineman, you've got a pretty talented offensive line. It's all about just putting the pieces together. It'll be interesting to see how Sharon Moore really does in his first year coaching the offensive line. I think another thing that I want to keep an eye on is how they hold up early on against teams like Washington, even heading into, I think it's week 5 when they play Wisconsin. Contown, I think you're going to that game. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they do. I mean, there's no doubt that they're super talented. Like you said, Keegan, he's a mauler up the middle. Zach Zinter is a mauler up the middle. Stuber is a mauler. Hayes is an athletic left tackle. Barnhart's an athletic right tackle. So there's a ton of potential along the offensive line. It's just, putting it together. I think they did well last year. I don't like to really count last year. I know people were disappointed in the season that we had, but I mean, they only played 6 games. It was so rushed and so wild, and so many key players were out with either injuries or they opted out. And especially at key positions. I mean, when you lose a guy like Nico Collins, who decided to opt out, Jalen Mayfield was never really healthy. Hutchinson went down. Pay was in and out the lineup throughout the season. Ambry Thomas was out at corner. I mean, it was a rough year all around. So I don't really like to count that. But back to what we were discussing, Contown. I know that you wanted to get into the wide receivers. It's a really interesting wide receiver group that we have this year. What are you looking for out of the wide receivers this year?
Yeah, just to tie a bow on the O-line discussion real quick, like you mentioned, both of you touched on. This group is not going to take, it's super talented, but it's not going to take long to find out, where they are at in relation to their ceiling, with Washington in week 2 and Wisconsin in week 5. So going to be a lot of beef on that line. If Keegan, Stuber, and Zinter are all in the middle there, like Matt mentioned, the coaches probably hope and the fans probably hope. It's going to be a lot of beef to combat those two big defensive fronts we're going to see in the first half of the season there. But yeah, so I did want to touch on the wide receivers. I think it's a particularly interesting group, especially with the highest profile transfer into the program that Michigan has had in the last couple of seasons here. And Dalen Baldwin really saw his stock blow up kind of towards the end of the transfer portal season with workouts at Ohio State and Penn State. He had a firm Ohio State scholarship offer. I think Penn State was trying to figure out logistically in terms of their numbers how they could get him an offer. But I don't know.
They should have just taken him.
Yeah,
honestly. They need all the help they can get there.
That's he's a dude that, I mean, Ohio State, who has I would say the deepest, most talented wide receiver room in the country, even above Bama.
Absolutely.
Got Baldwin a scholarship. So if Ohio State's making room for the kid, you probably should too. So as a general rule of thumb. So wide receiver room, it's super talented, but I think there's a lot of room to go to hit that talent ceiling. There's a lot of people who we don't know quite where they are yet in their development. And then you've got guys like Ronnie Bell, who has quietly been just a productive leader on the field for this team for every year he's been in the program now. So I hit my depth chart already. I think we are going to see Cornelius Johnson, Baldwin on the outside, kind of like the offensive line. That is, to me, with Bell in the slot, to me, that is the fan optimal situation, the coach optimal situation to get those three playmakers as kind of your starting three if we're in 11 personnel with three receivers, tight end, and a running back. As Matt mentioned, when we're going through the depth charts, it's not just going to be those three. You really do have a top four or even a top five. Coaches have nothing but good things to say whenever they're asked about Mikey Sainristil. We saw him start to kind of make his way into the rotation, carve out a more prominent role in the rotation last year and make plays. One of the first game that Cade really got extended run in last year, he led the team down the field for the first touchdown against Wisconsin. And it was a really nice connection to Sainristil, who made a great play on the ball. He's, kind of typical Gaddis slot receiver. He's probably about 5'10", maybe 5'9", but just really twitchy. And on that touchdown against Wisconsin, you saw he can play above his size. He high pointed the ball, made a good play over the defensive back. So he gives you a great fourth option if he's your four. We saw Roman Wilson a little bit last year. He played a good deal. He didn't get probably as many targets as he wanted or as the coaches would have wanted him to, but he was playing as a true freshman as a wide receiver. As a rule of thumb, that's a very hard position to be great at the second you step on the field at the college level, especially at the Power 5 level. But we know the kind of track speed he brings, the kind of testing speed. He's a sub 4.4 40 guy. He's sub 11. He runs in the mid 10s in the 100-meter dash. So super electric runner that is. I think we all have him pegged for a backup slot on the outside, but he's another guy that is like, if he's bringing more testing numbers, more athleticism to the table than a Bell. He's going to be a faster, on the hoof than Cornelius Johnson. So he's a guy who, if he really gets towards his ceiling in fall camp here, could push for a starting spot, could be that fourth receiver, fifth receiver, and carve out his share of the targets this year too. And then AJ Henning is, if Bell is starting in the slot this year, like I have projected him to, AJ Henning is, you're going to go at least three deep in the slot, because AJ Henning, from what we saw of him last year, to me, he just looks like he's got a gear with the pads on that I haven't necessarily seen from another receiver with the ball in their hands. He's really, really electric guy. Another guy who's probably 5'9", but it's just, it doesn't matter how big he is if you can't catch him right. And even exactly. he made a great play against Penn State where he went up over the defensive back to catch the ball. Mm-hmm. So he's another guy who's
one-on-one action there.
Yeah, and Cade, I'm sure Cade will tell you he underthrew that because of his shoulder, which I'm sure is accurate. But Henning made an awesome play on the ball and plays bigger than his size. Just really, really, really electric guy. Got to get the ball in his hands more. Guys like him and Blake Corum, who we'll touch on more here, but got to find a way to get those electric playmakers the ball more this year, and I think they'll do that. So if Bell's in the slot, I think you'll probably go 3 deep there. And as Matt said previously, you're going to really have a top 4, 5, or even 6 at wide receiver, and that's going to be determined by these backups and these younger guys, how close they can get to their athletic and talent ceilings. Yeah, I barely even touched on Cornelius Johnson. I'll wrap it up with him. I think he's kind of I think he's a quieter kid, but he showed a lot of talent last year with offense not firing on all cylinders. He was still the guy that gave you a big outside threat, but they would still throw him screens. Like he's quick enough, he's agile enough to be a guy who can run in the screen game. He can be your deep threat too. Had a beautiful post connection from Joe Milton for the touchdown against Indiana. I think he's going to be really solid this year. Solid to great player on the outside. Maybe can approximate something like what Nico Collins gave you on the outside. Not saying he's going to be that right now, but he's kind of the next man up in that, big outside vertical threat. And I think he's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, CJ has the potential to be that on the outside. I mean, he was a pretty highly rated kid coming out of Connecticut when he was a recruit. So, I mean, you saw him with touchdowns against Rutgers, Indiana, made some nice catches in other games. I mean, I like what I saw out of him last year, and I'm really excited to see what he does full-time, 12-game season this year. I think we'll see some big things from him and whoever else starts on the outside, whether it's, Dalen Baldwin, Ronnie Bell, whoever else is opposite of him. So I'm going to get into the running backs here, and obviously there's not much question as to who's going to start. It's going to be Hassan Haskins. He was essentially the starter last year. I know Charbonnet got some run, but it ended up being Haskins as the year went along. I mean, he can do it all. He showed some promise as a pass catcher out of the backfield too, so I liked what I saw there. This will probably be his last season. He'll probably end up declaring for the draft. I know running backs don't have a really long shelf life, so another good season, he'll end up going to the draft and probably being a day 2 pick, maybe early day 3. Then Blake Corum, that's the guy who's got a lot of hype. Aside from Donovan Edwards, obviously, he was a highly rated recruit coming out of St. Francis Academy in Maryland a couple of years ago, and I really liked what he saw. Similar to AJ Henning, he just has another gear when you get the ball in his hands, whether it's catching it out of the backfield or just handing the ball off to him. I think it was the first play of the season last year against Minnesota. It was that little bubble screen to the right, and he just zoomed for 24 yards. I mean, that was one of the better plays of the entire season. You got Donovan Edwards. We all know the story on him. He's probably going to end up being like the second running back, as we mentioned earlier, with Blake Corum and Hassan Haskins kind of being 1A, 1B as the year goes along. I'm really excited to see what we get from Donovan. I mean, all the buzz on him has been as expected. He can catch it out of the backfield. He can run it up the middle, run to the outside. He's got the speed. He's got the size. He's got everything you want in a running back. And then another freshman that we have back there is Tavier Dunlap, who's gotten some really big buzz too. He's even been saying it's even been said that he's on the same level as Edwards coming out of spring ball. So it'll be really interesting to see how he does that. I'm sure it'll be a redshirt year for him, but once the running back room opens up a little bit more, I'm sure he'll see a lot more playing time as the year goes along next year. But to touch on the running backs real quick, I think that group will be the most important position group outside of the offensive line. I think you kind of have to depend on them as the season starts. You kind of don't know what you're going to get from the wide receivers outside of Bell and Cornelius Johnson. Not to say guys like Baldwin, Henning, Saint Rastil aren't talented. They obviously are. But I think it'll be easier to depend on the run game first. And with someone like Matt Weiss coming in, who's the quote unquote quarterback's coach, but really he's just bringing the running scheme from Baltimore over to Michigan. I think it would be really interesting to see how that works. I think it fits really well with the running backs that we have on the depth chart right now. So I'm really excited to see what happens there, just as long as the offensive line plays well, which I suspect that they will. I think Sharon Moore is a really, really good coach, and he gets the best out of his players. I know the tight end group was a little bit shaky over the past couple of years, but I don't think it had much to do with coaching. I think it had more to do with the players mentally, but that's a lot of the position groups that Michigan had. So I'm excited to see what the running backs do this year.
One thing on the running backs too, I think I agree with that point completely. I really think, when you're talking like the grand scheme of the offense, and, the quarterback gets all the attention and the line is deep and talented and there's a transfer receiver coming in, I think quietly Hassan Haskins is the most important guy on this offense. I think he becomes a little bit of the forgotten man. I don't know if that's because people are still mad about his high school ranking. If people want are always wanting the young, new, flashy, especially fans like us that follow recruiting, everyone wants the updates on the freshmen or the red shirt freshmen, the guys that are just getting there. And sometimes the guys in their third, fourth year kind of, not talked about as much, not hyped as much. And I'm expecting Haskins to be the bell cow. We've talked about the sprinkling in the other guys for sure, and maybe even more than sprinkle for Corum. But you're talking about a guy that's averaged over 5 yards per carry the last 2 years.
Yeah.
I think he's a player, and I just think people, especially with Charbonnet, leaving, him being the higher touted prospect, I don't know what it is, but it seems like people just don't want to give Haskins the credit that he's due. And I think he's going to be a big part of this season. I think he's a good player and he's fun to watch.
Yeah. He's kind of like sneaky twitchy.
Yeah.
If you get what I'm saying, like he's not the fastest guy in the world.
No.
He doesn't have breakaway speed, but he gets in and out of his cuts like really quick. And for as big as he is, it's really impressive. I mean, he's what, like 6'1", 220. I mean, they put him at linebacker his freshman year before switching back over to the running back position. But, I really like what I see out of Haskins, game in, game out. And I'm really excited to see what he does this year.
I think
as the full-time starter.
Yeah, I am too. To add Haskins, he really, I think, complements what Weiss wants to be from a run game perspective. And as you guys have mentioned, Weiss is kind of the quarterback's coaching name, but he brings that Ravens run game with him, the brain trust of that. So Haskins is just super physical. First guy never brings him down. And like you guys said, for whatever reason, he doesn't get the credit he deserves, but he's a really good back, and he's steady, through every other back we've had in and out of the rotation. The higher rated guys, Haskins has kind of been a constant. So I think he's going to have just another really good year.
Yeah, and those are some great points that you made, Contown. And like we've been saying, it's going to be really interesting to see how the running game is incorporated in this kind of new running scheme that's being brought over from Coach Weiss from the Baltimore system. As we all know, that's a really successful system. We don't have a Lamar Jackson on our team, unfortunately, but we do have plenty of running backs that are plenty talented enough in Haskins, Corum, and Edwards to kind of emulate what they run there in Baltimore. Now, I know that we said we would get into the defensive depth chart and kind of our positions of note tonight, but due to time constraints, we're going to save that for a part 2 later on this week, which will be coming out really soon. But in the meantime, thank you for listening to the very first episode of the Hail to Michigan podcast. I'm your host, Ronnie Harder, with Contown, Matt, Michigan 5, whatever you want to call him. We appreciate you guys for listening. Rate us, review us, follow us on Twitter, Wolverines_ATB. Thank you guys for listening. Have a great day.